Hello and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who brought out his Airwalks from 1997 for this episode. It's Jonny Numb.
Oh, yeah. Oh, those Airwalks, man. I was actually at a JCPenney's the other day, and Airwalks, they had Airwalks for sale. It's coming back.
It is. Listen,
yeah.
90s are back. People are all about the really 90s now.
It's interesting because my partner's niece, she's like 17 now. All the stuff she is listening to is like the stuff we grew up listening to in the mid-90s. It's like Nirvana, Green Day. It's like all that stuff. That's what's hot now.
That's pretty good hot. Like that's like Dookie. I remember buying the cassettes like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, never Alice in Chains. Never Alice in Chains. I just want to put that out there. But Soundgarden. Right. I don't mind Alice in Chains. I just never got into them. But
I actually never did either.
I listened to everything in the 90s. I was all over the place. And I guess talking about this movie, A Butter Place, as Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier called this during the intro that they did, the stupid intro, which is very funny.
Yeah.
For the DVD that you sent me.
They did 3 introductions, actually. I was like, geez, man. Yeah.
I was like, if this is the first one, I'm not going to listen to the other two, because I still had to listen to the commentary and watch the movie and do all the research. But this brought back so many memories of, I'm 41 and I watched everything in the 90s. Like in 92, I watched Reservoir Dogs when I was 10. I was watching everything. I just remember when Clerks came out, Reservoir Dogs, like Dazed and Confused, Slacker, just that whole, I'm leaving out hundreds of movies, thousands of movies, but it was a neat era, I think, to grow up in, because what like Sundance and Miramax, we won't get into the Weinsteins, but the explosion, I felt like, of independent cinema, sex, lies, and videotapes, and just this, maybe camcorders were easier to get, like film was more accessible. And it was fun to go back and revisit that and just watch this movie, A Better Place. I was filmed over 3 weeks in a hot Jersey summer, and a first-time director, very good cast for a $40,000 budgeted film. Yeah. But you sent this to me. You wanted to talk to me about this, Jonny Numb. This is part of our Feel Good series. And why did you want to talk about this movie?
Mark, when I sent it to you, it had actually been a couple years since I'd watched it, but it had left such an impression on me from that one experience that I was like, this is perfect. It's dark, it's bleak, it's morally and philosophically murky, which I think is kind of a through line in our Feel Good series. It's like sort of ambiguous. Like it's like you have, well, do you have bad characters, or is it like the nature nurture argument? I think that comes into play a lot in this one because you're dealing with like teenagers. I just really like these coming of age movies. I would maybe compare this a little bit to Super Dark Times because you kind of have little bit of the same age bracket, and they're dealing with some similar conflicts with what kind of transpires over the course of the film, and how do you deal with this? How do you reconcile something bad that happens against like your feelings and like how you care for a person? How do you reconcile like your moral compass against, wanting to look out for someone who you consider a friend, even despite their flaws. Yeah.
And you know what I love most about this movie is I really dug Super Dark Times and go back and listen to this episode. But what I like most about Ryan's character, played really brilliantly by Ian Bailey. And during the commentary, Vincent Pereira was saying that like Robert DiPatri as Barrett was very natural. Ryan is very actorly because Ian Bailey went to like not a fancy, but like a nice like school, and he just was very so you have two different approaches in this movie. But what I like most about Ryan in this film is that his entire life he's been told he's bad, right? And when you're told you're bad that enough, you're gonna believe it. Like that's just the way it is. Like if you are a pariah, if you are told you are bad, if you're told that you're a psychopath, the whole thing is his dad killed his mom, then killed himself, and now everyone's like, oh, you have a part of him in you. And we have to remember I think sometimes, remember when the Dawson's Creek explosion happened? Like I think sometimes we forget that teenagers are teenagers. They're not highly articulate, incredibly mature people. So when you're in high school and people treats you like that, you're going to buy it. You're going to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And also one thing I really admired about this movie is the character of Barrett. He's unlike anything I've really ever seen before. So stereotypically, you and I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and like I think stereotypically a character like that would be, for lack of a better term, a nerd.
He'd be the guy shoved in the locker, and it'd be played for a laugh. Yeah.
Yeah, and he'll fight anybody in this movie. He doesn't back down from anybody. He's a likable kid, but he also just doesn't take crap from any of the, he defies pretty much anything you would see, I think, in a mainstream film at that time.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Mark. The funny thing about Barrett's character is, did you watch Freaks and Geeks?
Yeah, I did.
He reminded me so much of Martin Starr's character, like just in terms of how he looks and a little bit of how he talks and acts. But you're right. He's like tall, he's lanky. Someone says you're like a stick. If you would have fought that guy, he would have like knocked you, he would have knocked your ass out. And he's like, yeah, you're probably right. He would have. But it's like he has the glasses, he has kind of the monotone, but he's also like, the bullies try to pick on him at the very start, like first day of school. He's sitting in a desk and the head jock comes to him and says, "Get out of my seat. This is my seat." And he's like, "Well, this is the first day of school. How can you have a claim on this seat?" kind of. And it just escalates from there. And he gets up, he pushes the guy. There's this whole thing before he just kind of reluctantly sits somewhere else. And I'm like, right from that moment, it's like, oh yeah, you're not establishing a stereotypical nerd. You're establishing an actual, person here, like an actual three-dimensional character.
Geesh, who would have thought, right?
Yeah, no, it's like, it can be done. It can be done, Hollywood. Yeah.
Especially in a 3-week shoot where, you know what I think too? I think any aspiring filmmakers, I mean, times have changed. During the commentary, Vincent Pereira was talking about the film stock he used. Like a lot of people these days are not using film stock, and they don't have to worry. I mean, they need to know about the exposure triangle, but they don't have to worry about what kind of film stock to use in a wooded area as opposed to an open area. But during this time, they were talking about how, they use a wheelchair as a dolly for the long take when they're walking on the road. They were talking about, there's that scene where Barrett meets Ryan's sister and she tells him about the accident and the pictures of the husband are cut out.
Yeah.
And I guess that scene took forever to film because it was just such a cramped, crappy place that the actors were like, "This is a cramped, crappy place. I can't get into this." And everyone fought. Right. It really is sort of a film school 101, which as me, as someone who teaches film, I stress El Mariachi to my students. I talk about Clerks. I talk about Do the Right Thing. I talk about the indies and how those, like, I also talk about Deep Blue Sea a lot, but whatever. And I show them hallway. I dedicate an entire episode to hallway fights. But so I'm not being super pretentious here, but I think movies like these are very important because it's a really interesting look into like how to make an indie a successful indie. And there's a lot of scenes where they're sitting down, but they have to. You can't have a lot of blocking in those scenes. You need to stand somewhere and talk. But I think first and foremost, what Vincent did best was hire the 2 best actors for the job, and they carry it. Like this is good, and it's not precious. You and I have watched a lot of movies, and indies that just feel too precious or like too.
And some there are some Miramax and View Askew films that are a bit too precious. I think so. No, definitely. It's like, oh, it's a bit too sentimental. It romanticizes, and this one doesn't romanticize, I don't think.
No, and it doesn't have that hyper, and it wasn't too. Like, I know this came out years after. Well, it was filmed in '95, so that means like it was already in the process of being written. So like Pulp Fiction, which had its inspiration from French New Wave and Italian westerns, but it didn't directly influence it, and so. It wasn't a reactive independent film. I think it was more of a this guy had a story to tell and he wanted to tell it. But this is very much so a first-time director's movie tackling subject matter like this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's that sense of, first-time filmmakers, for whatever reason, you kind of want to make an impression, kind of. And I don't think but it doesn't play out like Vincent was was like, well, I'm going to write this story about, disturbed teenagers and their lives or whatever. I think if he had been aiming to write something just for the notoriety that it would achieve, it wouldn't have come off as well, which leads me to feel that something was coming out of him, in the writing of these characters and the writing of this story. It feels very personal in a way. I didn't listen to the commentary. I looked at the deleted scenes and stuff, but I didn't listen to the commentary, so I don't know if he gets into anything in terms of the impetus behind his writing for this, or if he just kind of keeps it on the technical DL.
He just wanted to make Badlands.
Okay, well,
yeah,
there it is.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, definitely a lot of Badlands in this. I didn't think about that. Yeah,
there isn't a lot of there wasn't Columbine hadn't happened yet, and you know what though, like school violence was. Yeah, I don't know. You know what's interesting about school violence in movies is it's never treated, and maybe for a reason, it's never treated like this movie or other film. Like it doesn't tackle it, and this was the 90s too, man. So the bully in this movie, he's bullied by his dad. His dad's abusive. So when he gets beat up by Ian Bailey, his dad's like, I didn't raise no expletive, and it's like violence begets violence, and I still think that's nowadays, but I think back then it was like, don't, for lack of a term, don't be a bitch. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it's like the whole suck it up. There's, I mean that's like from the 1950s.
Yeah.
It was like when men
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like men couldn't, we talked about the devil all the time. It's like men couldn't show emotion. They had to suppress their emotions. They had to be the provider, the caregiver. They had to be the rock of the household, even if they were like totally effed up in the head. It's like they had to find a way around this because, psychiatry is not, psychoanalysis wasn't really a thing. And, back then it was all about masculinity. And even in the 90s, it was about that. You even get some of that dialogue in here about some of the things that I think ring true are when the bullies make like sort of homophobic comments towards, the sort of the outcast, and the outcasts come back, and it's like, it's not politically correct now, but in the 90s when we were in high school, that was the thing, kind of.
That was the language, man.
It was.
And I'm not saying it's right. I don't think it was ever right. I'm not like, I'm not saying like that's the way it was like back in the good old days. Like I'm not saying that.
Oh no. But that's what came out.
That was the language. Like that, and I think, but if you watch any movies from the 80s, 90s, like that was very much so what kids were taught and like how parents thought. But like this movie doesn't, aside from the clothes and the huge shirts and the jeans, the themes are there. So I think movies don't date themselves if they feature a kind of universal theme. Yeah. And they don't feel reactive. Like reactive movies immediately feel dated. Like you see Pool Hall Junkies and you're like, ugh. You see, but then you see something Breathless. I don't know. You're like, that's timeless because of just the way it was. It's so, this movie has, I don't know, but also I just think Ian Bailey is strong in this movie. And I was a Band of Brothers fan, so I had no idea that he was acting before this. And I just love him in this movie.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised he didn't explode after this movie, honestly, because this is he is like the nitroglycerin in Sorcerer, basically. You feel like one wrong bump and he's gonna go off because he is so keyed into philosophy. He's so intense in his sort of misanthropy, basically. He doesn't like humanity. And again, we go back to the nature nurture. Is that because he has this horrible stigma hanging over him because of what his father did? He's living with his aunt who
doesn't
pretty
like
much
him.
basically sort of projects what the father did onto him. I think that's part of it. And he doesn't like her either. The first scene is slightly funny and disturbing, but he's been working out in his room and he wants to take a shower, but his aunt's already drawn a bath. And he's like arguing with her, and then he just reluctantly goes into the bathroom and pisses in the bath, and then goes out again. He's like, "Enjoy your bath." So it's like there's like this, I think, little bit of sociopathy already at work in him. But again, I do go back to the nature nurture kind of thing. How much are we a product of our circumstances? and how much of it is, especially when you're a teenager and you're much more malleable, you're trying to find your personality, I think. When you're young, and high school is another wrinkle that makes it more difficult because everybody is trying to fit in. Most people are trying to fit in. They're not being themselves. They want to be accepted. So that adds an extra layer of confusion. High school is very confusing.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is stick out, right? But then you're not really being yourself. So then no one's being themselves. And you know what's I heard a funny story about that bath. Is the director was talking about that, and he had an aunt who she would just put the scalding hot water in the bath, and she wouldn't add cold water. She would just wait for the scalding hot water to cool down. Yeah. And so he was always like, I could probably just pee in there right now. You know, I thought this movie was going to go darker places. Okay. Did you? Okay. Like I thought.
Well, tell me what
I thought maybe like a school shooting or like so, like not just the aftermath with the bully at the end with Todd. Like I thought it was going to be I don't know. I thought it was going to be I don't know. I just thought it was going to be a lot more provocative from a first time director, but it was. And it didn't end as provocatively as I thought it was. Is that bad, or am I just so conditioned by that?
It's an interesting point you bring up. I guess given his character and what we know of him and how much we get to know him and how much I feel changes once Barrett enters the picture. How Barrett kind of presents a complication. Because it's like, oh, here's someone who might understand me, but I can't share him with anybody. He's got to be. It is almost this weird kind of bromance between the two of them in a way. I think the fact that they set up the bullying, the main jock bully at the beginning with that brutal locker room fight, which actually the violence in this movie actually makes me cringe the way it's done, because it feels kind of like. It feels kind of true to life. It doesn't feel like Hollywood
Roadhouse.
No, yeah, or or the hallway fight in Old Boy. It's like it's not. We don't have a hallway fight at the end of.
High school fights are ugly, man. They're ugly. They are ugly fights, and so this movie definitely showcases that. That's for sure.
It's like dirty and it's nasty, and I think the fact that they set up the conflict with the bully. Now, we've seen it a million times. The bully picks on the outsider, or in this case, the outsider picks on the bully for picking on the new outsider. And then we keep following Todd's the guy's name. We keep following him intermittently throughout the movie. And I think on that end, that gives him a bit of an arc. And I think it makes more sense that the film would begin with Ryan fighting him in the locker room as a way of defending Barrett, and it would end with Ryan like sort of finishing the job, but now it's a different, the motivation and the purpose has shifted to something more in line with Ryan's sort of misanthropic world-hating philosophy, basically.
Jeez Louise. And you know what though? Does he have any right to love the world?
I think there's something to be said. There's movies I've seen. I watch a lot of movies with angry put out loners. I think that's one of the things I relate to. I think it's kind of what we were talking about. It's like, well, the world says I'm terrible, so you either try and prove to the world that you're not, or you kind of get to that point where it's like, well, the pressure of things is just going to make me this person, whether I want to or not, whether I'm right in thinking this way about myself, whether other people are right in thinking this way about me. And we don't have that when we're teenagers. We don't have that level of empathy and sort of objectivity and awareness. Because I've talked with my therapist many a time about this. Like, oh man, I felt like I should have been easier on my mom and dad and not been such a brat sometimes. And she's like, well, you had no awareness that you were just centered on yourself, because that's what kids are. They're centered on themselves. They don't have that, what you get hopefully in your 20s, if you're not a sociopath, kind of, you start to be like, oh, well, the world is bigger than just me and what I want in the moment and what I think I need in the moment. It's more complicated than that. So. Anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. And, I think a lot of high school kids, especially ones like Ryan, who, I bet you his upbringing wasn't great. His parents probably had a lot of fighting. Then he had his aunt. So this is a guy who he was never able to focus on the world. He focused on himself and went inwards because he was just in sort of survival mode.
Yeah.
Like when you're in high school, like it or not, I mean, there are differences, and I know that they're generational. The kids in the 90s are much different than they were now. But your world is so small when you're in high school. And so when you're 16 years old, you might have traveled a few places, you might have done this or that or the other, but you're focused on yourself because you don't really have to focus on other people. You don't have, some people do, correct me, but I'm not saying everybody, but I would say the majority of kids are just going, okay, I have algebra, I got to get my car, my parents are dumb because they won't let me go to this movie. So you're focused on because you don't have to think about. You don't have to, does that make sense? And that's why I think Barrett's good, because his mom had to deal with the loss of his dad, and he has to help out with his mom. And I think he has more empathy with people because he had that loss and he had people to look after. So they're just two totally different examples of high schoolers here, which I like. And I guess what you're saying too is, I think every high schooler, we have regrets, right? But I don't think we had it. We couldn't process that all yet. And also I think Ryan has a problem, and Barrett to a certain extent, is that they're smart. They're smart kids. And that doesn't, sometimes when you're smart and not tough, that doesn't work well with jocks, or bullies. No, there's a lot of cool jocks. That doesn't work well with bullies. Yeah. And so, I guess it'd be easier if you're just kind of not as smart and boring, because then you just get picked on and you don't fight back, and then you don't make it put an even bigger target on yourself.
Right.
But I mean, I just think this is once again a movie that did a pretty good job of capturing what it is to be a teenager without doing the She's All That, without doing the 16 Candles, without going John Hughes. But also this movie doesn't go Larry Clark. This movie doesn't go bully. I would say this movie's somewhere in between The Way Back and what's Bully. There we go.
Bully.
Yeah, I would say it's a mixture. It's on the beach.
Yeah, definitely.
And so is Bully.
Yeah, a lot of beach stuff in both those movies. Yeah.
Whoa, Jonny Numb. I don't know where that came from. I don't even. But yeah, so I'm happy that it finds a middle. And so I show my students the trailers for kids in Gummo. I'm like, the 90s were crazy, y'all, and they're like, what is happening? But yeah, this movie, I think it does a good job of tackling, like you said, the introverted kids, fatalism, existentialism, just all those things, but it doesn't do it too pretentiously. No. And the thing that's interesting, Mark, and I was thinking about this after I rewatched the movie, I was like, it's saying something that Ryan's dialogue and Barrett's dialogue is coming off. It rings true. It doesn't ring okay, some 35-year-old wrote this dialogue, but they're both using these big words. They're familiar with these, Ryan has read all this philosophical stuff in the wake of his parents' death. So I can buy into the fact that he kind of have a mind that's churning with these concepts, and that he's a bit brighter than maybe he shows outwardly in his school studies. And I think Barrett, I think with his loss of his father and just kind of being forced to adapt, it's kind of, it puts things on a bit of a different plane and adds to their outsider status, because something I thought was, it's interesting when you lose a parent at a young age, kind of, and I'm speaking for myself, because it sort of does shift your thinking of things. And I can't really say specifically how, but you're all of a sudden sort of faced with this, that's okay, that there was life, now there is no life. And how do you move on from that? This person who you relied on to an extent, or you thought would be around for a couple more decades, is, not there anymore. And I think it's sort of, sometimes I know it kind of shifted my mentality to a more existential plane when, I lost my mom when I was 19, not to get all soapy on the show, but, it was just kind of I found myself getting into actually Sartre and philosophy and stuff like that, and thinking more about, well, what is life in the greater intergalactic, infinite space and time sense of things, kind of. So that might explain a bit of how I am today. But yeah. Well, I think it's really hard for kids who maybe experience trauma when they were growing up or experience that, because you can't just be a kid and enjoy yourself. And so I think there are kids in high school who have that high school experience because they have a 2-parent home. I think sometimes people call them the outsiders, but I also think these are kids who at a young age were forced to think about loss, were forced to like look at themselves. Like, in high school, you shouldn't have to look at yourself and just be like, am I, you know what I mean? Like, you should just exist and worry about what you have to worry about. I'm not saying be a bad kid, but I think, like you said, at 19 or any of these, you experience this, and then you just really gotta sort of, like you said, shift your priorities or think about other things. And that doesn't work too well for other kids who just live their life carefree.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's why there are cliques, I think. That's why there are different groups. I think it's just people who have different life experiences and then how they juggle them. I don't know. This is a pretty fine look into those kids' lives. And one of the more mature ones, I would say, but also it's by a 45-year-old didn't write this who's like, man, I need a hit. Okay, there's a girl. She wears glasses and overalls. And when they take them off, she's hot. You know what I mean? Like there's, or like the John Hughes romances in idyllic Chicago households, Chicago suburbs. And it's.
Ducky would not end up with Christy Swanson at the end of that movie. That's not how the world works. Frank Whaley would not have ended up with Jennifer Connelly at the end of Career Opportunities. She would have, the actual movie Career Opportunities would have been Jennifer Connelly chasing after him with a chainsaw because she's so pissed off at having to spend the night in a Target with him. Anyway, I digress.
That's 2 episodes in a row where we've gotten Career Opportunities. Hey,
I did not like that movie.
No,
Sorry.
but that's, people don't explore that, man. Like I'm telling you, that's, and I guess that, like, even like the 90s independent scene. I loved a lot of those movies, but they were older than I was at the time, so I couldn't really gel with I love Party Girl. Parker Post is amazing, but I couldn't really bond with that. I couldn't really bond. Like I thought Swingers was cool, but that wasn't me. And so this would have been interesting to watch because it was by a younger guy who wrote it. He had maybe something to say. He'd been thinking about this for a long time, and that's honestly that's why I like our ever expanding how more people are making films nowadays. It's just there's so many outlets to put film out. And I think also the indie boom of the 90s helped people put movies like this out. And then I know this movie never took off. It did really well in the festivals. I never even heard about it until 3 decades after its release, a long time.
Right.
Thanks to Jonny Numb. But it's 25 years. But it's I don't know. It's a good piece of work. It's a mature piece of work. It's a very much of a first filmmaker's film, but I don't know. Like, this is one of those movies where if you just put it in context of what it is, a $40,000 film shot in 3 weeks, it's excellent. It's really excellent for that. And it's very mature and it's not as provocative. That was the biggest thing that made me happy, man. Like, I was like, something gross is going to happen. And it does, right? Like, it's sad and it's,
well, yeah, it's dark. It's still dark in its own way. Maybe not
super dark times.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's maybe not quite in the way. It sounds like you were maybe anticipating something
like Elephant
on a bigger scale, like Elephant or something
Bully.
like that. Yeah, I mean, this did remind me more of Bully, at least in how what ultimately happens to the bully in the film, but it doesn't quite go as far with like the the aftermath and what have you. I like how the film ends actually with that last line, and it's like, that's it. And it's like, what do I do now? It's like what now? Okay, well, you don't know what now because that's the end of the movie. And I kind of love that it didn't go into like, oh, okay, and this is what happened, a year later we catch up with Barrett and find out what's going on. But yeah.
I mean, Ryan wasn't long for this world. The problem is he's a really good looking kid, had money. He could exist as like a Bateman in American Psycho.
Yeah.
But he also, I don't think he was that vain. I don't think he was a much different type of angry person than like a Bateman or, all the cult heroes of the like Tyler Durden. He wasn't one of them.
Mickey and Mallory. Yeah.
He was I don't know. He's just, the kid's bottled up. He's ready to explode.
That's the interesting thing, Mark. I guess that's another thing is that, Ryan, Eon Bailey he's a handsome looking fellow. He can rock a polo shirt and some some Dockers. I gotta say, I'm like, this guy is a pariah, and it's just interesting because it's like in an alternate universe he would have like this, in the John Hughes movie, he would have that good looking girlfriend already. He'd probably be more overtly like a bully character, he'd be the guy who's picking on Anthony Michael Hall or John Cryer or whatever. But it's kind of a fascinating positioning of this certain look. Like, just, he looks very normal. He looks very well put together when you see him in school or when you see him at any time. He's dressed like a quote unquote normal kid would be dressing, in the mid 90s. And that kind of adds an additional wrinkle to it, because it's like, this guy doesn't look like he has anything wrong on the outside. But then you see that fight scene in the locker room and how he, pummels that guy's nose in a way that made me just like, ew, it's just okay. There's something wrong here. And, there's a thing when you have a parent pass away at a young age, but it's a whole other thing when you have that, oh, he's the crazy kid because his dad did this really horrible thing. And I like that Vincent doesn't go into he doesn't explain any of the motivation. There's no backstory. There's no explanation as to what was going on in the dad and mom's relationship. We just know they're dead and it was terrible. And you see some really awful brief flashbacks to it, and of Ryan discovering it as a kid. And it's just like, that's all you need, really. That's all that's going through his head is I saw this horrible thing. I can't get it out of my head. It doesn't matter why they did it or why, what was going on between them. It's there. It's there. It happened and it's done. Now, what do I do with it as a person?
And we can look at, growing up, we can look at moments in our lives that we remember, right? That were quite gnarly, but they were 1/100th as what Ryan saw. And they still informed us as adults, so the trauma that this guy has on him, and also too, though, I think what Bailey does well is there's an energy about him that's off, and I know nothing about crystals or energy or chakras or signs or if you're into it, I really find that interesting how people can read it, but sometimes you just sense someone's energy is off.
Yeah.
And listen, I think there are times when people use their own prejudices to say the energy's off, but that's more on them. But I do think there are sometimes people who have this really interesting energy that no matter who you are, when you're around this person, you're like, this is. Does that make sense? I'm not saying personal opinions or where you grew up or how you feel or any of that. There's just a person, and I think Ryan has that though. But I don't know if that's nature or nurture.
Yeah. And that's another question that I like that the movie just kind of leaves hanging there. It's kind of, you the viewer, you make the call, you explore that, kind of on your own time, and I think it's interesting how, yes, I've to your point, I've known people like that, and they're usually folks that I have a few things in common with. But there's something that's like, oh, there's this thing here, and it's kind of like throwing the rest of the clockwork out of sync. But it's like it's sort of like when you're listening to Ryan do his horrifying speech with the slow dolly in, where they're just sitting out in this actually beautiful.
That was a zoom. That was a slow zoom. They didn't even dolly that.
Zoom. Yeah. They didn't even. Okay. Yeah. I just noticed that the camera just keeps getting closer and closer to him. And the closer it gets, the more horrifying the stuff he's saying becomes. It's like I'm sitting there listening to him. It's like, in some of what he's saying, I was, in some ways, I'm still with some of the stuff he's saying. I'm like, yeah, I still think about that sometimes. But some of it's very much like this high school mentality of it's like, oh, I just hate everybody. And, the uncut version of that where he's dropping all these racial epithets too is just like, oh yeah, he's okay. This is the point where I get up and walk, take a walk because I need to kind of unplug from this for a second, because this is it's going from, okay, I get it, to like, oh, you're talking about sort of, mass extermination events or whatever to improve the landscape and all that. I'm like, I don't know if that's the answer.
Run away.
Yeah, it's like, run away.
And what's funny, I remember I was flying home once. I was coming home from a Comic-Con and there was a delay. And the people at the desk were like, hey, our flight's delayed because they have to do maintenance on the wing. There's something wrong with the wing. And this guy started, it was a long wait, but it's the wing. Like, it fix the wing. Who cares?
You kind of need the wing to fly.
And this guy got up and just started this scene. We're waiting too long, and he had eventually had probably 8 to 10 people with him, and yeah. And then he would keep going further. Then a couple people would drop out, and then he would go further, and then a few people would drop out, and eventually it was just him, like losing it. So it's kind of like his speeches, And I think this is, I hate to keep going back to this, but you watch movies like, I don't know, Spring Breakers, you watch movies like this, you watch movies like Fight Club or American Psycho, and you're either totally on board with what these people are saying, or you're like, oh, this is a satire. You get the joke, like with American Psycho, or you, like or like Boondock Saints, or like yeah, these guys, yeah. There's always interesting ways to watch these movies, but that's why they're interesting, though. It can speak about someone's persona and what they think about the character. Yeah, this guy was right, or this guy was wrong, or this guy was a monster. It's interesting to put an undefinable character in front of people and then let them decide what this person is, and it makes for interesting conversations. And so, but like Ryan's not, he's a kid.
Yeah.
And like he witnessed something horrible. His aunt. I don't know what they say in Jersey. What do they call it in Jersey? What's the aunt? We need to get Levengood over here. But this kid had never had a chance to be right. So I think some kids, if they have a good spirit, they can not fight their way through it. But I do think sometimes kids have
endure kind of.
But Ryan definitely has that sociopathic wave. But he never had a chance. So he could have been a rich sociopath, or he could have been a loner sociopath. So but it's not evil. It's not like it's just looked at as kind of just the violence, and like how violence can just create more violence, and then like how people deal with that violence. And there's no major speeches in here. Like, listen, when I was young, I got beat up. And I trained and I went to beat this person up. And you know what? I pummeled him good. But you know what? It didn't do anything for me. I was still just as angry. And next week, I pummeled another kid. And the week after that, 3 of them. Like, wait, what? Like,
I'm thinking of American History X, the paper at the end where it's like, Eddie Furlong saying in voiceover, "Hate is baggage." He's totally reformed over the course of writing this paper for his class. But no shade towards American History X. I haven't watched it in a while, but I liked it when I watched it back in the late '90s. Yeah.
I mean, that's just a case of Ed Norton being incredible in the role. I think sometimes when actors are really good in movies, you're like, man, that was a good movie. Then you think about it later and you're like, wait. But you can be not hoodwinked, but you can be really entranced by a performance.
Oh yeah.
And then you're like, hey, I don't think it's that easy.
Yeah. That's. And I think that's what gets me about stuff like that, because that one's almost like it almost kind of does the structural formula kind of thing, where there's like this redemptive arc. It's not like a romper stomper where I think Russell Crowe is just as horrible at the end as he is at the beginning. So,
like 2001. Clockwork Orange.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's not even a Clockwork Orange has that. It's like, oh, I was cured all right, Only it's a bit of a paradox in that movie. Yeah. So, yeah.
And oh gosh. Good old, I was, and then I wrote a letter. And then all the world's problems were solved. And now we're good.
I don't, the older I get, I'm kind of like, I'd rather watch something like A Better Place than like, I mean, John Hughes movies have their place, no pun intended. I like some of them. I got the Breakfast Club Criterion and everything. I mean, that for all that movie's contradictions, it's like I still think it's a good movie. I love watching those actors act off of each other and everything. Go ahead.
And like, sorry to interrupt, like, but you got like, remember in the like early '90s when you watched Breakfast Club? That was like one of the first ever movies where everyone got together and realized like, oh, we all have problems. Like there wasn't. Like, you know, I know in the 50s you maybe had some Brando, you had some James Dean. I think the 70s, 80s kind of 70s kind of got into more like the realism, the gritty realism. So you definitely had more like naturalistic. So like, I think America finally embraced the Italian neorealism, like French New Wave, got a little bit more realistic. But like 80s, man, like you had Revenge of the Nerds, you had Animal House. So even if we look at like in context, like Breakfast Club was good for kids to watch, I think, just to be like, oh, yeah, we all have like very simplistic, very problems are solved at the end, but I guess for what it is, like for what it is, I think it was important in the 80s for some people to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it till the mid 90s myself, or actually it was probably like the late 90s. I saw it. I watched it with my first girlfriend, so that would have been in 98 actually. Yeah, and you know, that movie was just actually kind of considered just like a rite of passage thing. It's like you have to watch this because she was the one who was kind of insisting that we watch it together. So it was kind of very much like this, you know, you're of a certain age, you know, you should watch this movie, you know, and you know, to your point, it's like I like that it's just kind of a character piece. Maybe that's part of what appeals to me is that there's not a lot of flash. There's not a lot of fanciness with it. There's some cheesiness, like him walking across the acoustic tiles, which would never happen in reality because he'd just fall through them. But, you know, just the way these kids interact, and one minute they're saying something and they agree with each other, and the next minute they're saying something and getting on each other's nerves and they're arguing about it, you know. Oh, you're awesome one second. Oh, you're a bitch the next. That's very kind of, I don't know. It feels very true to life, true to being a teenager with, you know, you're ruled by emotion. Everything is like fluctuating faster than you can keep track of it. So one minute you're like really happy and the next minute you're like miserable and angry. So it's, yeah.
And depending on how you're raised, your temperament, your parents, your nurture, your nature and the way you were nurtured, it explains how you deal with that. And I think this would have been a good movie for some people to watch, I think, because it's an interesting way of like how violence can go in movies and how rarely it's ever treated three-dimensionally. But I mean, I guess it is, but those aren't the movies that are going to make it huge. And so I think movies like this definitely get relegated to the sidelines because do you want to watch that? Like, do you like, you need that theatricality. You need that emotions to get butts in seats, not just like, oh yeah, you know what? I just like boxing. Like it's cool. Like I'm not, okay. So I'm not totally broken and I'm doing this because of this and I need an outlet for this and blah, blah, blah. I was like, I just I like combat sports. So it's, I don't know if maybe you can make sense of this. I don't even know where I'm going, but it's just a movie that, I don't know. I just thought it was interesting the way it, I don't know, looked at these kids and but it didn't try to overly explain them, but it also, they feel believable and lived in and different. And we don't really get much of that.
Yeah. And I think maybe the difference there is that, you know, in the John Hughes movies, you know, since we'll just use that as the yardstick, for lack of a better yardstick, because his stuff was so popular, and sort of, I would say, helped define the landscape of what you saw in the 90s, like with the whatever it takes, the bring it on, the she's all that kind of stuff. So I think what's interesting about this is that it's a different side of that coin. And you often in John Hughes movies, well, Harry Dean Stanton was my poor dad in Pretty in Pink, you know. Mom, I don't know what happened with Mom because I haven't seen that in forever. She's probably dead. But at the same time, it's like, well, she probably died of natural causes. Dad loved her a lot, you know. So it's like Molly Ringwald has to kind of carry the torch in being her own woman as a teenager and kind of being the mom surrogate for Harry Dean Stanton. Whereas in this film, I'm kind of like, you know, these are two traumas that these boys undergo, and, you know, sort of this uniting factor, I think, in how they are the way they are. And it's a sort of trauma that you don't quite see presented in such a grim kind of matter of fact way. Actually, I'd forgotten so much of this movie that when it started, the whole thing with Barrett getting the hose for his dad while he's up cleaning out the gutters on the roof, and I was like, is this a dream sequence or something? And it's like it's shot like one, because the camera follows him. He gets this tangled up hose, which is kind of a metaphor for the tangled up morality and the tangled up philosophy of this movie, and he pulls it back, and we see that his dad, he's had an aneurysm and he's fallen and he's cracked his head and died. And it's so surreal. And it's shot in such a surreal way that it's like, is this really happening? Is he actually does wake up, but we find out it actually happened. It's not a bad dream. It's a bad dream, but it's a bad dream of something that happened to him. It's not like, oh, my dad's still alive. He's making breakfast. He's okay. It's like, oh shit, I'm still not over this. It's like, I'm still haunted by this, but it's only been 3 months. So I understand, how he would be haunted by that, for a long time to come.
Yeah, that's not going to leave you.
And the same with Ryan. I think there's an additional flashback moment that I really love that we haven't brought up, where he's a little kid. It's after he's discovered his parents sometime later, and he's talking to his aunt. And it's like it's beautiful looking outside. It's like trees. It's like a spring day. It's clear. And he says, like, all innocent, to his mom to his aunt, do you think my dad's in heaven? And she slaps him and says, listen to me and know that your father is burning in hell right now. And again, it's like these flashbacks to the violence, the flashbacks to the blood, the flashbacks to that moment where your aunt says something really horrible. Maybe she meant it, maybe she didn't. Maybe she was caught up in the emotion of the moment, but that makes sense to me that that's what Vincent and Ryan go back to, is just these brief flashes of stuff. Because it's like, that's the stuff that's burned into your memory. That's the stuff that I'm not going to say you need to get rid of, but it's stuff that you need to somehow learn how to confront or live with in yourself. And that's, I think, another part of where the internal conflict with Ryan comes from. So,
well, geez, and I love that line too, where he goes like, the only person here that actually accepts me is like an antisocial bastard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like he even calls him that.
There's so many great lines in this movie.
And like, she's like, you're just like him. You watched it. I mean, like, everyone writes him off.
Yeah.
I just think but also, like, he's very aggressive. I know Ryan's very aggressive to women, like when he goes after Augustine, like he's really, and then, to his credit, Barrett sticks up for her and does that, which once again, I was like, what's happening? Like, why is he, I don't know. And then also you have the thing with the guy on the private property who kicks him off the land.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
He does that on purpose, does he not? But he's a kid, so who knows? You still throw the rock.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and I almost think I think a sign of the maturity of the characters is that Ryan starts to argue with the guy who's like, well, this is my property, get the hell off of it, and he and Barrett have this brief conversation. It's like, this guy probably doesn't even appreciate what he has, which is probably true.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably just like, I just have look at all this acreage I have, and it's mine. It's more about that than actually doing anything with it or appreciating it. So I kind of liked how they had this like brief little back and forth before Ryan is like, oh no, I'm going back there and giving him a piece of my mind, or I'm going to tell him something. I'm not leaving or whatever. I did feel like the rock throw was deliberate though.
Yeah.
He maybe didn't mean to, I'm sure he didn't mean to kill the guy, but I think he probably wanted to hit him at least. And
listen, so I taught high school for many years, and we're talking about like that guy speaking to him like that. When you have certain students who are supposed to grow up too soon, or have what Ryan, or have what Barrett, or have a home life that's not great. Like, the last thing they want to do is go to school or have adults tell them what to do, because that's their life. So once again, that's like a believable thing for why he would want to go back. Like, you don't want, like, does that make sense? Like, it's really hard to take instructions when you've grown up probably just without parents, living in a house, kind of doing what you want. And then all of a sudden this guy on this property is telling you what to do. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and you don't think it through, but when you live that kind of life, when you have that freedom, you're like, well, no, like I'm not gonna just like I think other kids would just take it like, okay, I'll get off your land, sorry. But like someone like that who doesn't have to answer to people, that would make him mad. So once again, it's another situation that's not contrived. No. I mean, that feels more organic to the story. So it's it's just good writing. It's a good writing by a guy who did a good job on this film, and he talks a lot during the commentary though. Jonny Numb. Okay. He barrels through everybody, but there's important things. It's like when they're on that water tower, you see the boom mic pole. Like he has some fun stories.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah.
But it's, I don't know. I think it all still works, and you could tell that he had Terrence Malick on his mind. You could tell that you could tell that he cared a lot, but he knew his stuff when he made the movie. And it's just, I don't know, it's just an ambitious little project. Not little, I don't want to talk about it, but like ambitious independent film.
Yeah, I would say it was little for what it was. I mean, $40,000 even in 1995 dollars is not a lot of money. That's pretty low. So yeah, no, I agree with that, Mark. I think maybe it's refreshing because, you were talking earlier about how Tarantino had kind of made the splash with Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, around the same time. And I think the fact that Vincent doesn't go that route of kind of the hip ironic, depiction of violence, like maybe what you'd see in a 70s Italian crime film or something like that, which, Tarantino might be trying to do in Pulp Fiction or something like that. He goes for a more gritty, more realistic depiction of things, and even his like artistic flourishes. I feel like I wanted to mention something that came across my mind, and you can tell me if I'm reaching with it. But I kind of liked how Barrett and Ryan, when they're together, they're always at like these concrete structures, kind of like a lot of them are in bad shape. Some of them are graffitied or whatever. They've just been like lost. Some of these things have been lost to time, like the warehouses in Asbury Park with the windows busted out. But you still have these huge concrete structures that they're kind of like gravitating towards and hanging out at. And I guess something I was thinking to myself was, is the concrete, the stability of concrete kind of like a metaphor for the firmness of Ryan's belief system? And it's like only through some extreme action, like a wrecking ball taking down the concrete, the concrete structure being leveled so something new can be put in its place. Is that kind of a metaphor for his personality and his journey? It's like he's kind of this wall, and he's kind of like that's really it's like something needs to knock him off his pedestal. I guess something else needs to knock him off his pedestal to make him reevaluate things. I don't know, or if he's even capable of that. I just thought it was an interesting motif of the concrete, like concrete structures. Yeah.
And building off that, I have a couple points. Building off that, I think all the concrete too. You have the abandoned buildings, the broken glass, the graffiti. Everywhere he goes is dilapidated. So he's not even he's at closed down water towers. Like he's a structure that's still very tall and powerful, but everywhere he goes. But I also think too, all these concrete, all this broken down stuff, like that's places where he can be alone. This is a guy who wouldn't go to a mall. This guy wouldn't. Yeah. He wouldn't go to the ice cream shop. He wouldn't go to the roller rollerblading. Like he would be the guy who was in the woods. He's the guy who's on the tower. He's the guy who's skulking around a park. Like that's not that you go to those places to
get away.
Get away and not be around that. Does that so it's
Oh yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it, he even has a line about how this place was beautiful. Or places are beautiful until human beings come in and trash it up or whatever. It's like they determine how much it's going to be desecrated or whatever just by dint of their presence, something along those lines. And I'm like, the composition of he's complaining about Asbury Park and I guess New York City and stuff like that. And I'm like, well,
if you hate people so much, you don't want to be around them. Like I like when he said, hey, let's go to the city because we have to know there's someplace worse than this. So it's I think when you get to that point in your life, you do withdrawal and you go to the place, like, and then I think that becomes your persona. Like, I think that became his persona. Like, look how many kids are, in high school, you get treated a certain way. That becomes your persona almost to a certain regards. And so I think he leans into it, and I think that's just where he goes. And also, like, they're probably cheaper to shoot at, but I like your idea of that concrete. He's looking for something, but none of it's, like, he's not at a beautiful brutalist structure somewhere. He's not, he's more at home in the abandoned buildings or the parks, because he can be alone. Does that make sense? Like,
it's not like, I'm sorry, I'm going to make a dig at a movie here. It's not like Saltburn, where a character would be looking at this beautiful painting of like some sort of wartime massacre, and it's clever because it's saying something deep about the character.
Yeah.
It's not like, he would rather isolate and be more with nature and withdraw from, and as we know, it's like you need that human contact, and you can't just it's not healthy to just have an echo chamber.
That's all he has, right?
So that's the thing there. So he's already withdrawn, and he hangs out with a guy who I think he views as a little bit like himself. So, and that's their connection, and he lets him in, and then it's like when he doesn't turn out to be kind of, when he spends his time with other people, when he starts to push back against some of the stuff he's saying, it becomes a bone of contention. It's like, well, I've been I've had friendships or relationships with people where it's like, they're cool up until you start to maybe you start to articulate your own thoughts, and then they're like, well, what's this all about? It's like, why don't you agree with me? And I've had my run-ins, and I've known people who've had run-ins with like narcissistic personalities like that, and it's quite you're like, okay, it's sort of like,
and they both speak their mind too, right? I don't think Ryan would like Barrett if he was an egg from Arrested Development, which makes me happy. Like, I don't think he wants eggs. Like, I think he likes this guy Barrett because he will fight and he will speak up and he will do that. Does that make and so but he also has no idea how to handle his emotions, this kid. So he doesn't overreact, I wouldn't say, but he also, I kept thinking this was gonna, I was like, is this gonna be like Cape Fear? No, not Cape Fear. Is it gonna be like Fear with Mark Wahlberg, or he becomes like a stalker, and it never goes any of those places. It's like, once again, it's just another reason to appreciate this movie. And I dig it. I love it, Jonny Numb. What other thoughts do you have about this movie? Or do you want to jump into our 1990s independent movies draft that we would take to a deserted island that's full of wonderful, it's very comfortable. Like we said with Nick Rehack and you, like, you go to this island for 6 months. When they pick you up in 6 months, you look exactly the same.
Yes.
Maybe better.
I just had a few minor observations. I took a lot of notes on this movie, actually, but I like that the ferret was named Cimino after the director Michael Cimino. There's a reference, Vincent makes a reference to Heaven's Gate. There was a line that he took from Heaven's Gate and included in A Better Place. I haven't watched Heaven's Gate yet. I have the Criterion, but it's like over 3 hours long, and I need to like etch out an afternoon to be able to watch it finally. But I thought that was interesting. I like that we never see Barrett's mom. She only at one point we hear her talking to him on the phone near the end of the movie, because she's always away working like double shifts to take care of him and pay the bills and stuff. Yeah. I like that we never see the mom. I think that just makes, and it sort of adds another angle to things. And maybe, I think we talked about it with the Super Dark Times episode, is like in the 90s, your parents say, you come back home from school, you're like, I'm going out to my friend's house, I'm riding my bike over. They're like, be back in time, be back by dark, be back in time for dinner. It's like, and they just kind of, it wasn't like nobody had cell phones. Nobody was like, you called the police if your kid didn't show up, or called a neighbor or something. But it was very like, it was more open. You could just go out and do whatever. It wasn't, weren't really helicopter parents back then. So I thought that sort of added an interesting wrinkle. It's like really the kids' world kind of, they're on their own, trying to figure stuff out.
But that's an important part about growing up, but I also think it can be a dangerous part of growing up because you have to maybe grow up too fast sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe, you wind up doing things that you regret with a sword and a milk carton. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
In the park. But, and I guess just one more thing, and maybe it's adding a little bit of authenticity to the film, which I already feel kind of looks and sounds pretty authentic as is. But when Barrett and Ryan first hang out after they meet at the lookout tower and they're walking down the street to go home, when they stop, they say a few words and then they separate. I like that in the background you can hear someone mowing their lawn,
yeah.
and you know that someone was just out there mowing their lawn while they were filming, but you hear this like put 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 of a lawnmower going. And I felt like that added just so weird to a thing to kind of to hone in on. But I was like, it makes it feel even more real right now, is the fact that someone's just out there mowing their lawn while these kids are just in the street talking. So
if they didn't have Skywalker Sound, Skywalker Sound did the mix for this.
I saw that. Yeah.
If they didn't have Skywalker Sound, they would have been screwed. But
Probably.
they definitely needed them, and the way they fixed everything up for them. But no, I mean, yeah, this movie, it's very Badlands.
Yeah. And Mark, is this your way of saying we should do that one next?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got, I'm like every Criterion person that gets made fun of. I have the Blu-ray sitting right here unopened, right next to me. So it's, I just got to watch it now.
Yeah, I watched it sometime last year, and I actually really dug it. I'd heard such good things about it. I'm like, oh man, this really is as good as everybody says it is.
Oh man, Badlands. So, well, listen, it's feel good. But,
okay, it does a feel good movie. Yeah.
All right, so hey, let's do our Desert Island talk.
Okay.
So so we're gonna pick 5 1990s independent movies, five independent films from the 1990s that we'll take with us to this desert island, and those are the only 5 things we can watch while on a very nice island. Coffee and it's all great there. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Like it's not super comfortable, but you're never uncomfortable.
It's kind of like a Starbucks without the noise. Yeah. It's kind
of... you know what? And like it's so perfect that you're kind of like, I don't miss all the noise, but also I like my creature comforts. Yeah. So you're not like you're not looking like Tom Hanks from Castaway.
No.
All right. So we can pick the same movies if we want. Doesn't matter. But I'm gonna let you take the first pick here, and you can.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I tried to set a little handicap for myself. I didn't want to pick anything that we've talked about or that we might talk about, because I didn't want to I love the Virgin Suicides, but we've talked about it before, so I just wanted to maybe go with some stuff that's hopefully a little less expected. I don't have them in any order, Mark, so we'll just roll with it. But since you mentioned Parker Posey earlier, another movie like A Better Place, this movie is one that hit me kind of when I was like in my late teens, was Suburbia, the Richard Linklater film.
Yeah.
Great ensemble cast of actors who really went on to, like Nicky Katt, Steve Zahn, Giovanni Ribisi, and you got Parker Posey. Yeah, Parker Posey. And it's based off of this stage play by Eric Bogosian, and it sort of probably started my love affair with movies where characters are just hanging out talking. It's just a bunch of characters hanging out at the it's not the Quick Stop, but it's some convenience store, and they're just spending their night there. And they're just getting into arguments. They're talking BS. They're talking philosophy. They're getting drunk. One of their friends who's made it into the big leagues of the music industry comes by in a limo, and Parker Posey's his press agent and everything. And it's just interesting to see like how over the course of a couple of hours, basically the relationships shift and change. And the performances are fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. I love that movie. I watched it so many times when I was in my late teens and early 20s. So it really, that one kind of hit hard for me. So yeah.
Oh no, that's a good pick. I love it. Like you didn't. Yeah. I don't think either of us are gonna pick Dazed and Confused and Slacker, are we?
Mark, I'll turn in my MFF badge. I haven't seen either of those.
Oh wow, cool.
They're Criterion put them out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next Criterion. So.
Okay, so I'm gonna go with. I'll send them to you. You sent me enough.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai. I have to pick a Jim Jarmusch movie if you're picking independent films. But this one's Forrest Whitaker, and it's a brilliant. The score is wonderful. It's very funny. There's some very good lines. It's Forrest Whitaker is like a samurai, and it's just oh man, I could just watch it over and over and over. And I love the characters, and I love Jim Jarmusch. So I'm gonna take it's 1999's Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai because I love that movie so much.
I picked up the DVD at a flea market. I still haven't watched it. I want to watch it though because I've heard it's so good. Yeah.
I mean, it's just I love Jim Jarmusch. Like there's multiple movies of his I could pick, but I went with that one because it felt right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm gonna give a shout out to I think Andy Goulding on the MFF Facebook.
Oh,
I'll admit, Mark, when you put out this question to the group, I was like, I should probably just look over what people sent in because I'm probably like missing a lot of stuff from my list. Just maybe stuff I haven't watched in a while, and maybe never got logged on my Letterboxd. So he, I think, had Crumb on his list, and I am like, oh my god, yeah, one of my favorite documentaries of all time about the 60s counterculture cartoonist Robert Crumb, and it's just one of the most jaw-dropping, powerful documentaries you can watch. It's very intimate because it's about his family, his relationships with his wife, daughter, his ex-lovers are interviewed and everything. It's a fascinating movie to watch, and that was what got me started on wanting to seek out his comics and stuff like that.
Nice.
So I love. Have you seen it?
No, I've never seen. It's been on my radar for 20 plus years, but I've never watched it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, Criterion put that one out too. So next 50% off sale. Yeah.
Money.
Yeah, I know. It's just really like you just watch it in kind of a trance because it's like, how are these real people? Because there's like so much, these are people who have a lot of damage, but it's like not Hollywood movie damage. It's like it's their lives kind of damage.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating, very disturbing, but it's like you can't help but get sucked in by it. So Crumb, yeah.
Perfect. Oh man. Okay, so I'm gonna take El Mariachi. Because
good one.
Robert Rodriguez is my guy. His book Rebel Without a Crew is incredible. I recommend it to all my students. He's long been one of my favorite directors of all time. And just learning how he shot the movie, but he had to have everything planned as carefully as possible because he didn't have much film. Yeah. So it's like it's just interesting watching how he made it and the story of how he raised the money. And it's just one of those movies that's just loaded with creativity and I want a 1990s independent action movie on my island. So I have two. I have Ghost Dog and I have El Mariachi. But listen, I have to, man. Like Robert Rodriguez, I listen to all his commentaries. I watch his cooking schools. I followed his career my entire, probably since I've been what?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
12, 10,
from Dusk
12?
Till Dawn, Desperado.
He's a guy that works outside the system. He's in Austin. He's in Trouble. He does Troublemaker Studios. And I just admire him and how he's done and how he's worked his career. So I got to include that. Like I have to include El Mariachi.
And I think it's really interesting because that's one that I only watched for like the first time last year as well. And I was like, holy crap, this movie is as great as everybody was saying it was back when it was like taking the festivals by storm. I was like, everybody was like El Mariachi. And I was, to your point, I was like, he really, the way he shot that. And I'm like, how much did he spend on that movie?
Wasn't it 15,000?
It was something absurdly. Yeah.
Was it? 7,000.
$7,000, not 700,000, which isn't even a lot, And I was just amazed at how he really established his aesthetic with that film. And I think to an extent, he still brings some of that stuff even to something like Alita Battle Angel, which was like $200 million movie. He still kind of has this troublemaker, if you will, outsider art kind of aesthetic going on with his attitude, that still comes through. in his movies, which I like. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, Desperado. I remember watching in theaters. I think I bought a ticket for another movie, snuck in there. I watched From Dusk Till Dawn in the theaters. Like, I've just followed his career. I've always wanted him to succeed, and he's like an outsider, but he's made it in, and he still likes being on the outside, and I love that about him. So yeah, that's my second pick.
Okay. All right. So for my third, we were talking about movies that maybe didn't pick up a lot of momentum or aren't as well known as they should be, i.e. A Better Place. I am hoping more people kind of pick up on the movie after listening to our conversation about it. But this is a movie that I think was languishing for more than 20 years without distribution, and it was only released very recently by Vinegar Syndrome. It's A Gun for Jennifer, and I watched it just a couple days ago, and it's from '97, and it's basically the 70s had I Spit on Your Grave, the 80s had Ms. 45. Okay, imagine this is the 90s answer to those movies. It's very gritty, shot in New York. And also imagine if it was more than one woman as part of this group that goes after, men who are raping and abusing women throughout, the Big Apple. So it's a very interesting movie. I was sort of blown away by it, honestly. It's really gritty. It has that, what is that aspect ratio, Mark, where the sides are blocked off?
1.85 to 1? Or is that 4:3?
Or it's more of a box in the middle of the screen.
Is that 4:3?
Okay.
Let me, or 1.8, no, it's not 1.85 to 1.
No, it's
1.37 to 1.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that sounds good. So I think it was shot on film. But it's just a really powerful movie. Good performances. I think it's really, I would say it's a really relevant movie for today, actually. Because there's it brings up a lot of arguments, for men being scumbags, but it also brings up a lot of arguments as how far is too far in terms of vigilante justice. I know that stuff came up in movies like Death Wish or whatever, but it's kind of interesting to see it taken pretty much an exclusively female point of view. So there's conflicts, there's murky morality in this movie as well. I was utterly captivated by it. The performances feel very real, really no known actors in the film, but everybody does a great job. It's, just a very gritty New York shot film before New York got all cleaned up, and it's good. So
I love it. Perfect. Gun for Jennifer. I'm gonna go Smoke Signals. Have you seen Smoke Signals?
I have not.
It has a very bad wig in it, but I still like it a lot. It was written by Sherman Alexie, just one of my favorite writers, and I watched it in college. I remember going to the theater at FSU and watching it, and it stars Adam Beach, Evan Adams, Irene Beddard, Gary Farmer. It's just about a road trip about a guy who has to pick up his father left, and his father died, and he had to go pick up his body. So it's about him on a road trip. But it's a movie that I've I was on an airplane the other day, and it was on the airplane. I just watch it. It's a movie that I just watch. And it's I think Adam Beach is wonderful in it. It has a really bad wig in it. Other than that, it's a good movie. But it's it's pretty heavy to take on an island, but this the themes of fatherhood and dealing with your family and then just the whole thing about it's a coming of age comedy drama, but it's also a road trip movie. And I just love Adam Beach in it. I still think he should have been nominated for an Oscar for Flags of Our Fathers.
Okay.
And it's just a good movie. It's a really good movie. And so that's Smoke Signals. That's my third one.
Awesome. Well, for my fourth one, I'll go with one that I think is just a lot of fun to watch, and that's Frankenhooker from 1990. I got some flack for saying I like this movie better than The Bride of Frankenstein, but so be it. I hold by that opinion. Frank Henenlotter wrote and directed it. He's the guy who did Basket Case, Bad Biology, Brain Damage, a bunch of other pretty notorious films. And this is just basically a retelling of kind of the Frankenstein story. A guy's girlfriend has an accident has a tragic accident with a lawnmower. So he reconstructs her body using I believe it's like the body parts of prostitutes, and she comes back to life. And it's, I think Patty Mullen, who plays Frankenhooker, is just like, she gives honestly one of the great performances in all of horror cinema. She's hilarious, and her body language and twitches and ticks are like so spot on and hilarious. It's just a lot of fun. It's just a really fun movie and very creative, I think, despite its low budget. Yeah,
I've never watched it, so add that to the list. Hey, this is fun.
Oh.
We're never watching some of these films. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is tough because there's 3 I want to pick, but I'm just gonna go real quick. I got to do Bottle Rocket because Wes Anderson was huge for me. Mm-hmm. And Bottle Rocket is probably one of my favorite films, and I still quote it all the time. Like, I never wanted to answer that question. I never want to answer another question about water sports ever again. It's a movie that watching Royal Tenenbaums in 2001 and laughing when no one else in the theater was laughing, I was like, maybe I like movies differently than people. And it was, Bottle Rocket's just a movie I adore. I have some of his print. I have a print of it up in my office from Tim Doyle, and it's probably my. I really liked Wes Anderson movies when they're more blue collar and focused on, like, Asteroid City. I know Scarlett Johansson was an actor and Schwartzman was a photographer, but they're hurt, like they're catastrophically wounded people is what they call themselves. And that's when I like him best, when he's dealing with more baggage in Darjeeling Limited and movies like that. Like, that's when I think he's at his best. So I'll take Bottle Rocket as my 4th. Now I got to struggle to think what my 5th pick is, but I can do it.
Okay. All right. So, all right. I guess this is my last one. Well, it was down between it was between 2, but I'm going to go with this one since it kind of pleasantly surprised me on a rewatch, and I think it has this great attitude and creativity about it. It's Matthew Bright's Freeway from '96.
Oh man.
Yeah, this in an alternate universe, like, you could pair this with A Better Place, only this is like, there's some similarities there, but it is so foul, so un-PC in so many ways. It's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood through like the filter of 90s dysfunction, basically, where little Reese Witherspoon, who's not so innocent, runs afoul of Kiefer Sutherland, who is the big bad wolf. And it's, when I didn't like it when I first saw it, like, back in the late 90s. And I think back then I was like, I don't like these characters, so I don't like this movie. I didn't quite have that ability like we do now when we do the Feel Good series to be like, okay, this is a horrible character, but I understand the horribleness of the character, kind of. And it's not just a horrible character doing horrible things just to be horrible, necessarily. Yeah. So it's kind of, learning that difference was kind of important. But when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, I love the attitude of this, the way he tells the story, and he does such a good job of recreating the beats of Little Red Riding Hood in a totally unique and innovative way. But it's like dark, it's violent, it's vulgar as hell. But I would argue that, Reese Witherspoon and Kiefer Sutherland give like career best performances. Like, when they're together and like talking before he shows his true colors, it's like really compelling, I think. So it's a real like ride of a movie, I think, because you're getting like whipped in all sorts of different directions emotionally and tonally, but he manages to make it all work, I think. So,
man, when I watched Freeway when I was 15 or 16, I remember going, this is too much. Like, I remember I was like, I feel nasty. But that's good though. A movie that makes you feel that. So I'm glad you picked that. It's a wonderful pick. And I'm not going to pick Abel Ferrara's The Addicted, even though I like that movie, a nice black and white vampire film. But so, okay. So it's between either Before Sunrise for me or SLC Punk. Now, SLC Punk I loved because Jason Segel is like the punk in that movie. He's the one who wears the polo shirts and just beats the ever living crap out of people. When then the real punks are like not really the punks. Like, so the punk in that movie is a guy that doesn't dress like a punk. Yeah. Which makes me very happy. But I think I'm going to go with Before Sunrise because I just love a walk and talk. I love a link letter. It's my favorite of the trilogy. I got to have a link letter in here. So I'm going to take Before Sunrise. That feels right. Yeah. So I got, well, this is good. You have Suburbia, Crumb, A Gun for Jennifer, Frankenhooker, and Freeway.
Yeah.
I have Ghost Dog, Bottle Rocket, El Mariachi, Before Sunrise, and Smoke Signals.
Yeah, I think you have the more eclectic list, but I like both of ours.
No, man, this is brilliant. You picked Freeway, and I shuddered. So I'm glad you did that. That was awesome.
I was like, it was either Freeway or the Doom Generation, actually. So.
I didn't get any Parker Posey in here, which is kind of a bummer. I do like Kicking and Screaming by Noah Baumbach. It's a literate type film that I enjoy.
It's like I have that. I have the Criterion DVD of that, but I haven't watched it in so long. So I was like, I couldn't quite bring myself to add it to my list. But I did want to put. I love Baumbach pretty religiously. I mean, I would have, if The Squid and the Whale were in the 90s, I would have had The Squid and the Whale on my list.
You know what?
That's my favorite by him.
I'm dropping one. I'm gonna.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, I'll keep it.
No, go ahead. No.
Well, no, because I don't want to drop them. I was like, I'll drop one. Then I looked at my list and I'm like, I can't.
No,
so.
I want to. No, go ahead. I want to see what you say. There are no rules.
I would
here.
probably drop Before Sunrise because if I'm on an island for 6 months, I don't want to watch a romance. So I'll just watch Kicking and Screaming because they're just being idiots. Like it's people hanging around college too long and just drinking beer and like having conversations. So I'm gonna do that because you don't want to be an island. Yeah. It's like I miss my wife and my kid, so I don't want to think about that.
And the thing about Parker Posey is it's like whatever movie she's in, she reminds you of home. So it's like
I need my peepaws in here.
You need Parker Posey. Yeah.
But so real quick, I just want to read something. So Robin Sparkles said she would do Go, Clerks, The Blair Witch Project, Pulp Fiction. Chris Kelly, The Classic American Movies. He recommends 2 Days in the Valley, Reservoir Dogs, Living in Oblivion, True Romance, Buffalo 66, My Own Private Idaho, El Mariachi, SLC Punk, Ryan Groff as... Okay, here we go. Okay. Home Fries, Blair Witch Project, Go, Drop Dead Gorgeous, Welcome to the Dollhouse, Threesome, The House of Yes, Party Girl, Election Pie, Empire Records, Magnolia, Clay Pigeons, Cube, Serial Mom, Very Bad Things, The Last Supper, Chronos, Jailbreaker, Hackers, Jesse Deal, Clerks, Boondock Saints, Free Enterprise, Swingers, Big Kahuna, Swimming with Sharks, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. And this is a tough one. I think I can do it though. Mm-hmm. Andy Golding said, Trust, Paris is Burning, To Sleep with Anger, Boys in the Hood, Night on Earth, Gas Food Lodging, Simple Men, Suture, Crumb, Hoop Dreams, Dead Man, Before Sunrise, Welcome to the Dollhouse, Kicking and Screaming, Smoke Safe, Living in Oblivion, Palookaville, Schizopolis, Lone Star, Walking and Talking, Swingers, I Shot Andy Warhol, Henry Full, East Bayou, Slums of Beverly Hills.
Take a drink, man.
Buffalo 66. Ghost Dog.
I was afraid you were gonna pass out there, man.
I would have.
Yeah.
I committed. And I got it out there. I just had to like sit there for a little bit and like marinate in my lack of air to get those final things out.
Good job.
All right. Well, hey man, where can people find you, Jonny Numb, before we get you out of here?
Probably the best place to find me at this point is I'm still on Twitter or whatever you want to call it now, at Jonny Numb. There's no H in the Johnny. You can also find me on Letterboxd at Jonny Numb, and I have my own website where I write about just about whatever I want to write about. Sometimes I do post movie reviews, and that's JonnyNumb.com.
I love it, Jonny Numb.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
What's next? Clean shaven?
We can do that. We can do Badlands. We can talk about it.
Flip a coin.
Yeah. Because I feel like it's your turn to pick something, though.
Okay, let's do Badlands.
Let's do Badlands. All right. We can do Badlands.
I like that.
Good movie.
Some Terry Malley. Awesome. I'm getting my air back. Well, hey, man. Jonny, thank you so much for joining me, man. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Mark. It's great talking to you.
So for me, Mark Hoffmeyer, for Jonny Numb, this is Movies, Films, and Flicks. We'll see you next week.